let's go to our last section. We do have an additional tools, but that's going to go quickly. So mobility on demand analysis. So yeah, so this is something that obviously is pretty important right now. A lot of talk about mobility on demand, microtransit, first mile, last mile, and services that are not fixed route, but can be run by a transit agency. And so that could include a lot of different scenarios and types of service. So we're going to focus on a few that we can kind of analyze within TBEST and using our service levels and our mobility areas to do some work in that regard. So what is it that TBEST can do relative to mobility on demand? So fixed route service analysis within existing or potential MOD zone or mobility on demand zone. Identification of parcel trip generation within an MOD zone, which means what are the residential trips, commercial and work trips within an MOD zone that the parcel data can tell you. Examine demographics of the MOD and first mile, last mile analysis from transit stops. So it bears repeating what we cannot do. So estimate mobility on demand ridership and operational characteristics, meaning the number of vehicles and the cost. So that is something that we hope to do at some point, but is not yet available to us in TBEST. All right, so analyzing mobility on demand zones. So this is something that Gainesville/Gatorville had done and we've already looked at these mobility on demand zones. What we can do is assess service gaps for MODs, right? So essentially you create a walk shed from stops using the actual sidewalk networks, which is our walk shed. You can use we have a mobility on demand zone. So this is our first, and you have our fixed route transit walk shed. So basically we're subtracting the fixed route transit walk shed from the mobility demand zone to create the gaps in that service, right? So this is where you would want to focus your mobility on demand. And you can start looking at what is the areas that we should serve within this, because some might be just fields, so you're not going to serve those. So you want to look at where your density of trips are in terms of person trips from the parcel data, your socioeconomic characteristics, et cetera, inside of this gap area. You could also analyze linkages to first mile, last mile, or transit service. So you can create a drive shed with the desired mobility demand covered, so like 10 minutes from the end of a line of a transit station. And then erase areas that are already covered by transit networks in the drive shed. So that would be kind of this area. These are already covered by transit walk sheds. And then you would erase those areas from the source area, right, the drive shed. So the remaining area would be just those that are not served by transit and walk shed wise, only looking at those that would be covered by the drive shed. So again, it's a gap analysis type of result that we're looking for. So going back to our mobility on demand zone, this subtraction and equal to the gaps. So this is what we're looking at for that gapped area. So here's a community shopping center. Here are the parcels that are within it. So you can see it's pretty bare out of here. So here's an area that might be served. Here's an area that might be served in here. Pretty bare out here. Some areas right here, etc. So you might be looking at a contiguous area that you might want to serve as well. So that might also factor into it. But what TBEST can do is provide, in this case, the number of households in the area. You can also do dwelling units from the parcel data. The number of person trips is here as well that are generated from these different areas within this gap analysis for trip generation. Okay, so we have a an exercise for this. Any questions on that before I start with the exercise? All right, so let's start with this mobility on demand gap analysis. So we're going to open the TDP 2030 scenario. 2030. So we're going to add the MOD Zone 3 mobility area to the map. So under our mobility areas, we have our MOD Zone 3. And we can just right click on it and say open mobility area. And we'll add that to the map. Great. So we're going to use the mobility areas toolbar to create a 0.25-mile watershed around selected stops. So, oh, sorry. Before we do that, I skipped a step. Go to step 3. Use the mobility areas toolbar for fast selection with mobility area tool to select stops which intersect. So in order to do that, we use this mobility area refresh selection tool and we select stops. And what that will do is it will select the stops that are inside of the mobility area, which is our MOD Zone 3. And from here, we're going to create another mobility area, which is the 1/4 mile walk shed. So we're going to switch to our walk shed and we're going to keep it at a 1/4 mile. And we're going to say we want to create a walk shed from our selected stops. So if you're following along here, we have a set of selected stops that are within MOD Zone 3. All right, so these are the ones that are serviced inside the zone. We're going to create a walk shed from these stops that are selected of a 1/4 mile using the walk network from the sidewalks and the street network from these stops that are selected. So market walk shed of a 1/4 mile from the selected stops is the workflow here. So it's going to build that shed. I'm going to try that again. I think I know what the problem is. I think we've run out of hits for TBEST for the day. What we have is a free version of openrouteservice.org API that has a certain number of hits that you can have per day. And if you get a lot of usage, something like this can happen. So yeah, so let's try it one more time and to see if we can get it to work here. Oh, could be my internet, not sure. But what this is doing, it's going out to the internet and it's building these sheds from the OpenStreetMap. So it's not doing this locally. It's bringing back the data and it's processing it, but basically it's going out to the internet and grabbing this data from OpenStreetMap. So what we have now is a walk shed from the selected stops that we selected with the mobility area. And we want to save this. So we're going to use our mobility area save tool, and we're going to enter MOD Zone 3 walk. So I think we can clear the stop selection. We don't need the stop selection anymore. We have what we wanted from that. So what we want to do is use the mobility areas erase tool to remove MOD Zone 3 walkshed from the MOD Zone 3. To do this, in the TBEST Explorer, right-click on MOD Zone 3 mobility area and select erase area from mobility area from the context menu. So that was a lot of words, but pretty easy in practice. So we go to our MOD Zone 3 and we right click on it and we say erase area from mobility area. And in the list of mobility areas that it provides, which are all of the remaining mobility areas, we want to use our MOD Zone 3 watershed, which we just created here. This is that. And we want to erase this area from our MOD zone to create our gap analysis. So all of this is to create a gap analysis. So we hit erase area. It's going to ask for the name because it's going to create a new mobility area from this. And this is going to be MOD Zone 3 service. Yeah. And it's going to say that it was successfully erased. Excellent. So this is the service gap. So this is very similar to what happened on the slides, except we did this in practice. And we're able to kind of see this gap analysis where we have this zone in the middle that is not served by transit. And we might want to know a little bit about this one. So, let's do a land use summary on it. And we can do this. We can do it from here. So let's say trip activity. So here's the trip activity, mostly residential within this gapped area. But I want to take this from another perspective too, because there's another way that we can summarize this that might be helpful as well. So what we can do is we can start from our new service gap here in our list of mobility areas, right click on it. And we want to say land use market analysis. And we're going to do person trips and weekday. And we're going to say next. And market area within our gap, which is what we want. So, so we're going to use this tool to say, I want to summarize this relative to the totals. And it's saying service area totals. But in reality, you can say anything as a service area, any mobility area. So really, MOD Zone 3 was our original area that we wanted. And we want to know the percentage of MOD Zone 3 that is not covered by transit, right? So basically, what is the population and the employment that is not covered by transit, existing transit service inside of that Zone 3? And that's what our gap is. That's what this is. So this is going to use as the totals when it compares to the service area. The service area totals will be MOD Zone 3. Okay. So what you have here is, in terms of person trips, you have 6.7% of the service area, which is our MOD zone. In terms of person trips is the total is only 6.7% of it. So most of the MOD zone is covered in terms of walk access distance by existing transit service. Only 6.7% is not covered in terms of trip activity, person trip activity. So that's a kind of a unique perspective on this that TBEST can give you pretty easily to calculate that number. And so, so that's what I wanted to relate to you. Obviously, you can do this relative to not just SE data or land use data. You can do it relative to socioeconomic data, use the same criteria. So here's our distribution for population. And if we change this to a population profile, then the service area, it's only 18% of the total population within the MOD zone is in this gap area. Here's the distribution of variables for that. Okay, I think that's all we had for that. Yeah, so any questions on the mobility area gap analysis? And any comments about what you would like to see TBEST do in these areas as well would be welcome. So, we'll take any comments either in the chat or, in the evaluation form. So I'll remind you again, if when you do leave the meeting, we wrap up today, which we're about to, just make sure that you fill in your evaluation forms either today or in the near term.